They say no good deed goes unpunished, but for Lindsay Vance, a simple act of kindness nearly cost her everything. It was a storm that shook the county of Derbyshire, the kind that turns roads into rivers and fields into graveyards. When she saw a stranger trapped in the suffocating mud screaming for help, she didn't see rank or riches, she just saw life worth saving. She dragged him out with her bare hands, unaware that the man shivering in her arms was the very same tyrant threatening to burn her father's home to the ground. This is the story of how a muddy ditch changed the fate of an entire dukedom. The rain in Derbyshire didn't wash things clean, it just made the dirt permanent. Lindsay Vance pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, her boots making a sickening squelch with every step she took along the old York Road. She was 22, with hair the colour of roasted chestnuts, and hands that were roughened by years of scrubbing floors and digging turnips. Today those hands were empty. She had walked 5 miles to the market town of Bakewell to sell her mother's silver locket, the last object of value the Vance family owned, only to be offered a pittance by the pawnbroker. She had refused. Now she was walking home in a torrential downpour, clutching the locket, dreading the look on her father's face. Thomas Vance was dying. It was a slow, rattling sickness in his chest, exacerbated by the damp walls of their tenant cottage. But the sickness wasn't what killed men in these parts. It was the debt. The rent was due in 3 days, and Silas Crouch, the estate bailiff, had promised to evict them if they were a shilling short. A crack of thunder shook the ground beneath Lindsay's feet. Through the sheets of grey rain she heard something else, a high-pitched whinny of a horse in distress, followed by a man's shout. Lindsay squinted through the deluge. Ahead, where the road dipped into a notorious hollow, known as Dead Man's Drop, a carriage had careened off the track. One wheel was shattered, the carriage body tipped precariously into the drainage ditch. She ran. "Hello, is anyone there?" She screamed, the wind tearing the words from her throat. "Help damn this infernal mud!" a voice roared back. It was deep panicked and distinctly arrogant. Lindsay slid down the embankment. The scene was chaotic. A black stallion was thrashing in the mud, tangled in the harness, while a man was pinned between the carriage door and the steep, muddy bank. The mud was rising thick like quicksand, already up to his waist. "Stop moving," Lindsay commanded, grabbing a fallen branch. "You're only sinking deeper." The man looked up. His face was streaked with grime, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Even in his predicament, his eyes, piercingly blue and furious, held a command that made Lindsay pause. "Don't tell me what to do, girl. Get me out," he barked, gritting his teeth in pain. "I will leave you here to drown if you shout at me again." Lindsay snapped back her patience, worn thin by her own misery. She jammed the branch into the bank near him. "Grab this. I'm going to cut the horse loose first. If the beast rolls over, it will crush you." The stranger looked as if he wanted to argue, but the mud was inching toward his chest. "Fine," he spat. Lindsay worked quickly, pulling a small knife from her belt. She slashed the leather traces, freeing the panicked horse, which scrambled up the bank and bolted. Then she turned her attention to the man. "Grab the branch," she ordered. He gripped it, his knuckles white. Lindsay planted her feet, ignoring the suction on her own boots, and pulled. It was a brutal struggle. The earth seemed hungry, unwilling to let him go. She groaned with effort, her muscles screaming until finally, with a wet-sucking sound, the mud released him. He crawled up the bank and collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air. Lindsay fell beside him, her chest heaving. For a moment, they just lay there in the rain. "My leg," the man groaned, clutching his left calf. "I think it's broken." Lindsay sat up, wiping mud from her eyes. She looked at him properly for the first time. Beneath the layers of filth, his coat was made of fine wool, though it was ruined now. He wore a signet ring on his finger, heavy gold, with a crest she couldn't make out through the dirt. "You can't stay here," Lindsay said, standing up on shaky legs. "The temperature is dropping. If the cold gets into your bones, you'll be dead by morning." "My carriage," he looked back at the wreck. "Is firewood," she finished. "My cottage is a mile down the road. It's not much, but it's dry." The stranger looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "I have no money on me. Thieves took my purse 2 towns back. That's why I was driving so fast." Lindsay let out a bitter laugh. "I didn't save you for a reward, sir. I saved you because I'm not a monster. Now can you walk, or do I have to drag you like a sack of potatoes?" He gritted his teeth and stood on his good leg, leaning heavily on her shoulder. He was tall, heavy, and smelled of expensive tobacco and wet earth. "I am grateful," he muttered the word sounding foreign on his tongue. "My name is Ash." "Lindsay," she replied, struggling under his weight. "Come on, Ash, let's get you out of this storm." She didn't know that the arm draped over her shoulder belonged to Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Greystone, the man who owned the very mud they were walking on. The Vance cottage was a small stone structure with a thatched roof that had seen better days. Inside, a meagre fire crackled in the hearth. Lindsay kicked the door open and helped Sebastian Ash onto the wooden bench near the fire. Her father Thomas was asleep in the corner, his breathing raspy and shallow. "Quiet," Lindsay whispered. "My father is ill." Sebastian looked around the room. It was painfully poor. The floor was packed dirt. The furniture was handmade and rough, and the only decoration was a faded painting of a woman on the mantel. Yet it was spotlessly clean. "Sit," Lindsay commanded. She fetched a basin of warm water and a clean rag. "I need to look at that leg." Sebastian hissed in pain as she cut away the ruined fabric of his trousers. His calf was bruised a violent purple and swollen, but the bone didn't seem to be protruding. "It's not broken," she assessed her fingers, gentle but firm. "Just a bad sprain and deep bruising. You'll limp for a week, but you'll keep the leg." She wrapped it in linen strips. As she worked, Sebastian watched her. He was used to women who swooned, women who giggled, women who wore silk and smelled of lavender. Lindsay smelled of rain and wood smoke. She was focused, capable, and entirely unimpressed by him. "You live here alone with him?" Sebastian asked quietly, gesturing to the sleeping man. "Since my mother died." "Yes," Lindsay said, standing up to put a kettle on the hook. "We manage." "It seems difficult." "It's life," she said simply. "We work the land. We pay our rent. We pray the harvest is good." Suddenly, a heavy pounding on the door made them both jump. Thomas Vance woke with a start, coughing violently. "Open up, Vance, I know you're in there." Lindsay's face went pale. "It's Silas Crouch." Sebastian stiffened. He knew the name. Crouch was his head bailiff, the man he had entrusted to run the Greystone estate while he had been away in London for the past 3 years, dealing with Parliament. Lindsay opened the door a crack. Silas Crouch pushed his way in. He was a thick-set man with a red face and eyes like small dark beads. He wore a dripping wet coat and carried a riding crop. "Well, well," Crouch sneered, shaking rain off his hat onto Lindsay's clean floor. "Cozy in here. Where is it?" "Lindsay." "We have until Friday, Mr. Crouch." Lindsay said, her voice trembling slightly, but her chin held high. "That was the agreement." "The agreement has changed." Crouch spat. "The Duke is returning from London soon. He wants the accounts settled. I want the £5 you owe, or you're out." "Tonight." "Tonight," Lindsay cried. It's a storm. My father is sick. You can't throw us out in this. I can do whatever I please." Crouch stepped closer, looming over her. "Unless, of course, there's another way you'd like to pay." He reached out his hand, grazing her cheek. Lindsay slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me." From the shadows of the corner, a deep voice cut through the room like a blade. "She said don't touch her." Crouch spun around, squinting into the dim light. He saw a man sitting on the bench covered in mud leg, wrapped in rags. He didn't recognize the Duke. To him, it was just a vagrant. "Who is this?" Crouch laughed cruelly. "Taken in a beggar, have we? No wonder you can't pay the rent." "Get out," Lindsay said, stepping between Crouch and her father. "I will have the money by Friday. If you come back before then, I will go to the magistrate." "The magistrate eats from my hand," Crouch sneered. "Friday at noon, not a penny less, or I burn this hovel down with you inside it." He turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Lindsay sagged against the table, burying her face in her hands. Sebastian sat in silence, his fists clenched so tight, his fingernails bit into his palms. He had been away too long. He had simply signed the papers Crouch sent him, never looking at the details, never checking on his tenants. He had assumed his people were being treated fairly. He looked at Lindsay, who was now rushing to her father to calm his coughing fit. £5, Sebastian asked. Lindsay looked up, tears in her eyes. It might as well be 5,000. The crops failed last month. The locket. The pawnbroker only offered 10 shillings. Sebastian reached into his coat pocket. He felt for the hidden lining where he kept a single emergency sovereign, a gold coin worth £1. It wasn't enough. And if he revealed who he was now, while he was injured and vulnerable, he wouldn't learn the full extent of the rot in his estate. "I have to go," Sebastian said, abruptly, standing up despite the pain in his leg. "Go, you can't walk," Lindsay exclaimed. "I have family in the next town." He lied smoothly. "If I can get to the main road a carriage will pass, I must go." He needed to get back to the manor. He needed to be the Duke again. "You're stubborn," Lindsay sighed. She grabbed an old, gnarled walking stick from by the door. "Take this. And take this shawl. It's my father's, but he has blankets." She wrapped the rough wool around his shoulders. For a second, their faces were inches apart. Sebastian felt a strange pull in his chest, a desire to tell her everything, to promise her that Crouch would pay for his insolence. "Thank you, Lindsay," he said, his voice low, "for the life you saved. I will not forget this." "Just be careful, Ash," she whispered. He limped out into the rain, leaving Lindsay Vance, wondering why the beggar's eyes burned with such a terrifying promise of vengeance. 3 days passed. The rain had stopped, replaced by a biting cold wind. Lindsay had tried everything. She had begged the neighbors, but they were as poor as she was. She had tried to sell her labor in town, but no one was hiring until spring. She had £3 saved. She was still £2 short. It was Friday morning. A rider arrived at the cottage. It wasn't Crouch. It was a livery boy wearing the blue and silver colours of the House of Greystone. "Lindsay Vance?" the boy asked, looking down his nose at her. "Yes." "You are summoned to Greystone Manor immediately. His Grace the Duke wishes to review the tenancy disputes personally." Lindsay's heart hammered against her ribs. The Duke. He was back. Rumours said he was a recluse, a cold man who cared more for his horses in London than his people in Derbyshire. But if he was hearing disputes, maybe there was a chance for mercy. "I will come," she said. She dressed in her Sunday best, a simple grey dress that was mended in 3 places, and kissed her father's forehead. "Pray for me, Papa." The walk to the manor took an hour. Greystone Manor was a beast of a building, all stone turrets and towering windows, that looked like unblinking eyes. Lindsay had never been past the iron gates. She was led by a silent footman through halls lined with marble busts and tapestries worth more than her entire village. She felt small, dirty, and insignificant. They reached two massive oak doors. The footman opened them. "Miss Vance, Your Grace." Lindsay stepped into the library. It was warm, smelling of old paper and beeswax. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Standing by the window with his back to her was a man. He wore a suit of dark blue velvet, tailored to perfection. His posture was rigid, commanding. "Your Grace!" Lindsay curtsied low, her eyes on the expensive Persian rug. "I am Lindsay Vance. I have come to plead for my father's home. Mr. Crouch demands £5, but Mr. Crouch demands a great many things," the man said. Lindsay froze. She knew that voice. It was deeper, smoother, echoing with authority, but she knew it. The Duke turned around. Lindsay gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It was Ash, clean-shaven, his hair brushed back, standing tall despite a slight lean on a cane. The mud was gone, replaced by the trappings of immense power. But the blue eyes were the same. "You," Lindsay breathed, forgetting all protocol. "You're the Duke." "I am Sebastian Thorne." He said, his face unreadable. Lindsay felt a wave of heat rush up her neck, followed instantly by cold betrayal. "You lied to me. In my cottage. You saw how we lived. You saw Crouch threaten me. And you said nothing." "I was injured, Lindsay, and I was observing." "Observing?" Lindsay stepped forward, anger overriding her fear. "We are not ants in a jar for you to study, Your Grace. We are starving you. Sat in my home, drank my water, took my father's shawl. And all the while, you were the one holding the leash of the dog that bites us." Sebastian's expression softened just a fraction. He stepped toward her, favoring his left leg. "I did not know. Not until that night. I trusted Crouch to manage the estate. I was wrong." "So fix it," Lindsay challenged him, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "If you are truly the noble Duke, tell Crouch to leave us be. Here is the £3 I have." She slammed the coins onto his polished mahogany desk. "It is all I have in the world." Sebastian looked at the coins, then back at her. "I don't want your money, Lindsay." "Then what do you want?" Before he could answer, the library doors swung open again. Silas Crouch entered, looking smug, holding a ledger. He stopped dead when he saw Lindsay. "What is this trash doing here, Your Grace?" Crouch sneered, reverting to his bullying tone, assuming the Duke shared his disdain for the peasantry. "I told her to pay or leave." Sebastian turned to Crouch. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Crouch," Sebastian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Miss Vance was just telling me about your visit to her cottage 3 nights ago." Crouch paled slightly but forced a laugh. "Lies, I'm sure. These tenants will say anything to avoid paying their dues." "She said you threatened to burn the house down," Sebastian continued, moving closer to his bailiff, "and that you attempted to touch her without her consent." "She's a liar," Crouch shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's a seductress. She probably tried to offer herself to you, didn't she?" Sebastian slammed his cane onto the floor with a crack like a gunshot. "She saved my life." The silence that followed was deafening. Crouch's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I was the man in the mud, Silas," Sebastian said icily. "I was the beggar you mocked. I sat 10 feet away from you while you threatened a defenseless woman." Crouch looked from Sebastian to Lindsay, his eyes wide with terror. Then a dark, desperate look crossed his face. You were there," Crouch stammered. "Then you saw the stolen goods, surely?" Lindsay frowned. "What stolen goods?" Crouch pointed a shaking finger at Lindsay. "The reason she has no money, Your Grace, is because her father is a thief. I found Greystone silver in their cellar weeks ago. I was being merciful by only asking for rent, but if you want the truth, Thomas Vance has been robbing the manor for years." "That is a lie," Lindsay screamed. Sebastian looked at Lindsay, then at Crouch. The doubt in his eyes broke Lindsay's heart. He was a duke. Crouch was his employee of 10 years. She was just the girl from the mud. "Search the cottage," Sebastian ordered, his voice flat. "No," Lindsay cried. "Ash, Your Grace, please." "If there is nothing to hide, there is nothing to fear," Sebastian said, turning his back on her. "Guards, escort Mr. Crouch to the Vance cottage. Search it." Lindsay stared at Sebastian's back, feeling a betrayal sharper than any knife. He wasn't the man she saved. He was just the landlord after all. The ride back to the cottage was a blur of misery. Lindsay sat in the back of a wagon, flanked by 2 stone-faced guards, while Silas Crouch rode ahead on his horse, looking like a general returning from a conquest. Sebastian the Duke did not come. He had remained in his ivory tower, letting his dogs do the hunting. When they arrived, the cottage was already surrounded. "Turn it out," Crouch barked. "Every drawer, every loose board." Lindsay was forced to stand by the door, her arms held by a guard, as she watched the destruction of her life. They overturned the table. They ripped the stuffing from the single armchair. They pulled the meager blankets off her father, who was coughing so hard his face was turning blue. "Leave him alone," Lindsay screamed, struggling against the guard's grip. "He's dying. Can't you see he's dying?" "He'll die in a cell if he's a thief," Crouch spat. The bailiff walked over to the small sleeping area Lindsay used. He knelt down, pretending to inspect the floorboards. With a dramatic grunt, he pried a loose board up with a crowbar. "Ah-ha-ha!" Crouch shouted triumph, ringing in his voice. He reached into the dark hole and pulled out a heavy, ornate silver goblet wrapped in a velvet cloth. It bore the unmistakable crest of the Greystone family, a roaring lion. "There it is." Crouch held it up for the guards to see. "Proof the Vances have been stealing from the manor." Lindsay stared at the goblet, her mind racing. "That wasn't there this morning," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I scrubbed that floor yesterday. I would have seen it. You put it there." "Me." Crouch feigned shock, placing a hand on his chest. "I am a man of the law, girl. You are a desperate peasant." He turned to the guards. "Arrest her, and the old man, too." "No." Lindsay threw herself forward. "Take me. My father had nothing to do with this. He hasn't left his bed in weeks. If you move him to the jail, you kill him. I confess I did it alone." It was a lie, but it was the only card she had left to play. Crouch smiled a greasy, satisfied grin. "A confession. Excellent. Leave the old man to rot. Take the girl to the manor dungeon. The Duke will decide her fate." Lindsay was dragged out into the cold afternoon air. She looked back one last time at her father, who was reaching out a trembling hand toward her, too weak to speak. "I'll be back, Papa," she cried out as they shoved her into the wagon. "I promise." But as the wagon jolted forward, carrying her toward judgment, Lindsay felt the cold weight of despair settle in her stomach. She had saved the Duke from the mud, but who would save her from him? The dungeon of Greystone Manor was not a place of fairy tales. It was damp, dark, and smelled of centuries of misery. Lindsay sat on a pile of mouldy straw, her knees pulled to her chest. It had been hours. The sun had set, leaving her in pitch blackness. She replayed the events in her head, the way Sebastian had looked at her, cold, distant. He was a duke. She was a fool to think a moment of connection in a muddy ditch could bridge the gap between their worlds. A heavy, rusted creak echoed through the corridor. Light spilled across the stone floor as the heavy iron door opened. Footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate, a cane tapping against the stone. Lindsay didn't look up. She knew who it was. Sebastian stopped in front of her cell. He held a lantern, the golden light illuminating his sharp features. He looked tired. He had changed out of his velvet suit into more practical riding clothes. "Is it true?" he asked softly. Lindsay looked up, her eyes blazing in the lantern light. "Is what true? That your bailiff is a magician who can pull goblets out of thin air?" Sebastian gripped the bars. "He found the silver Lindsay. You confessed." "I confessed to save my father's life." Lindsay stood up, marching to the bars until she was inches from his face. "You know me, Ash. You looked into my eyes while I dragged you from that ditch. Do I look like a thief to you? Do I look like someone who would steal a goblet and then starve rather than sell it?" Sebastian was silent. Her logic struck him like a physical blow. It didn't make sense. If she had stolen silver, why was she walking in the rain to sell a locket for pennies? Why was her home so destitute? "The evidence is damning," Sebastian murmured almost to himself. "But my instinct—" "Your instinct is worth nothing if you don't use it," Lindsay snapped. "You are the Duke. You have the power to find the truth, but you are too lazy, too removed to see what is happening right under your nose. Silas Crouch is a snake. He wanted payment from me that wasn't money. When I refused, he threatened me, and now he frames me." Sebastian's eyes darkened at the mention of the payment. "What did he ask of you? Use your imagination, Your Grace," she whispered bitterly. Sebastian unlocked the cell door. The metal screeched in protest. He stepped inside. The space was small, forcing them close together. "I want to believe you," he said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "When I was in that mud, I thought I was going to die. You didn't ask for my name. You didn't check my pockets. You just saved me. That is not the action of a criminal." He reached out his hand, hovering near her face, hesitant. He gently brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His thumb lingered there, warm and rough. Lindsay's breath hitched. For a second the anger melted, replaced by the terrifying realization that she was falling for the man who held her life in his hands. "Then prove it," she whispered. "Don't just release me. Prove I am innocent. Check his ledgers. Talk to the pawnbrokers in Bakewell. Do the work." Sebastian stared at her, mesmerized by her fire. "I will, I promise you, Lindsay. If he has lied to me, if he has hurt you, I will tear his world apart." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "I cannot release you yet, not without proof. It would look like favoritism. But I will make sure you are comfortable." He left the lantern with her and locked the door. But this time, as the lock clicked, it didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a promise. Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Greystone, did not sleep that night. The silence of the manor, usually a comfort to him after the noise of London, now felt heavy and accusing. It felt like the silence of a tomb. He had dismissed his valet and locked himself in the estate office, a room he hadn't properly utilized in 3 years. The walls were lined with leather-bound ledgers, the spine of each one a testament to the years he had spent ignoring his birthright. He had treated Derbyshire as a bank account, a place that generated gold to fund his political ambitions and social seasons in the capital, leaving the details to Silas Crouch. Now the weight of that negligence was crushing him. "Get out," he had ordered the terrified night clerks earlier that evening. "Leave the books, all of them. And send for Mr. Finch." Mr. Finch was the junior actuary, a man so timid he seemed to blend into the wallpaper. When he arrived, shivering in his nightshirt, Sebastian was already seated behind the massive oak desk, surrounded by mountains of paper. "Sit, Finch," Sebastian commanded, not looking up from a grain report dated last October. Yes, Your Grace." Sebastian slammed a heavy book shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. "This ledger claims we lost 40% of the wheat harvest to unprecedented flooding in the East Valley last autumn. Is that true?" Finch swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the door as if expecting Silas Crouch to burst in. The records say so, Your Grace." "I'm not asking what the records say." "Finch!" Sebastian roared, standing up. He winced as his injured leg protested, but he ignored the pain. He limped around the desk, looming over the clerk. "I am asking you what happened. I checked the stable master's logs. He recorded perfect galloping weather for the entire month of October. No rain. No floods. So where did the wheat go?" Finch began to weep. It was a pathetic, quiet sound. "Please, Your Grace. Mr. Crouch, he said he would put my family on the street. He said he controls the magistrate." Sebastian felt a cold chill settle in his stomach. It was true. Lindsay was right. He had let a tyrant rule in his name. "Finch, look at me. Crouch is done. But I need proof. Not just numbers that don't add up. I need to know where the money went." He sells the surplus," Finch whispered, trembling. "He marks it as spoiled or lost, then sells it to private buyers in Manchester and Sheffield. But he keeps the best goods, the silver. The heirlooms he confiscates from tenants who can't pay his inflated fines. He sells those locally." "Locally?" Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "Where, Bakewell, Your Grace, there is a pawnbroker, Abernathy's Exchange. Crouch goes there once a month." Sebastian looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. It was 4:00 a.m. "Go to bed, Finch," Sebastian said, his voice drop-dead calm, "and pray that by noon you still have a job." The ride to Bakewell was a brutal awakening. The storm had passed, but it left behind a freezing fog that clung to the moors. Sebastian rode his black stallion hard, the cold air biting at his face, stinging his eyes. Every throb of pain in his bruised leg served as a reminder of Lindsay. "She dragged you through the mud," he thought bitterly. "The least you can do is ride through the cold." He reached the market town, just as the grey light of dawn was bleeding over the rooftops. Bakewell was asleep, save for a few bakers preparing their ovens. Sebastian navigated the cobblestone streets until he found the sign Abernathy's Exchange, gold, silver, and curiosities. He didn't knock. He dismounted, tied his horse, and kicked the door with the heel of his boot. The wood splintered near the lock, and the door swung open with a crash. "Thieves, I have a musket!" a voice shrieked from the back room. A balding, spectacled man emerged, wearing a nightcap, clutching a heavy iron poker. He froze when he saw the intruder. This was no common thief. It was a man dripping with condensation, wearing a coat that cost more than the shop's entire inventory, with eyes that burned with a terrifying intensity. "Lord Greystone." The pawnbroker breathed the poker clattering to the floor. I didn't know. To what do I owe the honor?" Sebastian stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The shop smelled of old paper and dust. "I am looking for a silver goblet, Abernathy, and candelabras, and a set of spoons with the lion crest. You know the ones." Abernathy's face went pale. "Your Grace, I run a respectable business. I keep detailed logs. Do not lie to me," Sebastian said, his voice dangerously low. He advanced on the man, tapping his cane against the floorboards with a rhythmic, menacing thud, thud, thud. "Silas Crouch has been bringing you stolen goods from my estate for years. He claims they are payment for debts, but we both know he pockets the coin." I don't know what you mean," Abernathy stammered, backing up until he hit the counter. "Mr. Crouch is your bailiff. I assumed he was acting on your orders." Sebastian slammed his cane onto the glass countertop, cracking it. "My orders? You think I ordered him to starve my tenants and sell my family heirlooms to a fence in a back alley?" He reached across the counter and grabbed Abernathy by the collar of his nightshirt, pulling him close. "A woman is in a dungeon because of a goblet you bought from him. If she hangs Abernathy, I will personally see to it that you are charged as an accomplice to murder. Do you understand, Abernathy broke? He made me do it. He said he'd burn my shop. He said he was the real power at Greystone." "Show me the ledger," Sebastian demanded, releasing him, "and give me the receipts." Abernathy scrambled to a hidden safe behind a velvet curtain. He produced a black book and a stack of signed papers. Sebastian flipped through them. There it was in black and white. Item: silver goblet, Greystone crest. Seller S. Crouch. Date: November 12th. That was 3 weeks ago. Crouch had stolen the goblet weeks before he planted it in Lindsay's home. It was premeditated. It was a setup designed to crush a woman who had dared to say no. "You will come with me," Sebastian ordered, pocketing the evidence. "Please, Your Grace, he'll kill me." "If you testify, you live," Sebastian said, turning to the door. "If you stay here, I leave you to the wolves. Choose." By the time Sebastian returned to Greystone Manor, the sun was high in the sky. He was exhausted, his leg was throbbing with a dull, constant ache, and he hadn't eaten in 24 hours. But he felt a strange, cold energy coursing through his veins. He walked into the manor, his boots echoing on the marble. The servants scattered at the sight of him. He looked like a man possessed. He went straight to the dining hall. Silas Crouch was there, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table Sebastian's seat. He was enjoying a lavish breakfast of cured ham-poached eggs and fresh bread. He looked relaxed, the master of his domain. "Ah, Your Grace," Crouch said, wiping grease from his chin with a linen napkin. He didn't stand up. "You're up late, or is it early? I trust you've come to your senses regarding the girl." Sebastian stopped at the opposite end of the table. The distance between them felt like a battlefield. "The girl," Sebastian repeated softly. "You mean Lindsay Vance?" "The thief," Crouch corrected, taking a sip of coffee. "I've drawn up the papers for her transfer to the county magistrate. I recommended a swift trial. We don't want the other tenants getting ideas about stealing your silver." "You are very efficient, Silas," Sebastian said, unbuttoning his coat. "Always thinking of my silver." "Someone has to." Crouch chuckled. "You have your politics in London. I have the burden of the estate. It's a thankless job, but I do it out of loyalty." "Loyalty?" Sebastian tasted the word. It was bitter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the bundle of papers, the grain reports, the weather logs, and the receipts from Abernathy's exchange. He threw them onto the table. They slid across the polished wood, stopping just inches from Crouch's plate. "What is this?" Crouch asked, frowning. He picked up the top paper. It was the receipt for the goblet. The color drained from Crouch's face so fast it looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I visited Mr. Abernathy this morning," Sebastian said, his voice rising, filling the cavernous room. "We had a very illuminating conversation about loyalty." Crouch stood up, knocking his chair over. This is a misunderstanding. Abernathy is a liar. A crook. You'd take the word of a pawnbroker over your own bailiff. "I checked the grain logs, Silas," Sebastian bellowed, slamming his fist onto the table. The china rattled. "I checked the weather reports. I know about the black market sales in Sheffield. I know about the fines you collect and pocket. I know everything." Crouch backed away, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit. But the doors opened, and 4 estate guards marched in their hands on the hilts of their swords. They didn't look at Crouch with fear anymore. They looked at the Duke, awaiting his command. "You can't do this." Crouch stammered, his arrogance dissolving into pathetic desperation. "I made you rich. I kept this estate running while you played Parliament. You owe me. I owe you a rope," Sebastian said, walking slowly toward him. "You took a woman who saved my life, a woman who has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire body, and you tried to destroy her because she wouldn't let you soil her." Sebastian stopped inches from Crouch. The bailiff was shaking sweat pouring down his red face. "I should kill you where you stand," Sebastian whispered, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "For what you did to her. For what you did to her father. But I am not you, Silas. I am a civilized man." He turned to the head of the guard. "Captain, take this man. Chain him. Not in the dungeon that is too good for him. Chain him in the stable yard where the tenants can see him. Let them see the man who stole their livelihood." "No, your grace, please," Crouch shrieked as the guards grabbed him by the arms. "I can explain, we can work something out." "Take him away," Sebastian roared. As Crouch was dragged out, screaming and kicking, Sebastian stood alone in the dining hall. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was clean. He looked down at his trembling hands. He had exorcised the ghost that haunted his halls. But the work wasn't done. The most important part was waiting in the dark, behind iron bars. He grabbed a fresh ring of keys from the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I'm coming, Lindsay," he whispered to the empty room. And for the first time in years, Sebastian Thorne ran. He ran despite the pain in his leg. He ran toward the dungeon, desperate to make things right. The heavy iron door of the dungeon did not creak this time. It slammed against the stone wall with a violence that made Lindsay jump. She had been sitting in the corner, tracing the patterns of mold on the damp bricks, trying to keep her mind from spiraling into despair. She expected Silas Crouch to return with a magistrate, or perhaps a hangman. Instead, she saw a ghost. Sebastian stood in the doorway. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving beneath his linen shirt. His cravat was undone, his hair wild and wind-blown, and his boots were covered in dust. He didn't look like a duke. He looked like a man who had run through fire. "Lindsay!" He choked out, his voice cracking. He didn't wait for her to stand. He rushed into the cell, the keys jangling in his trembling hand as he dropped them to the floor. He fell to his knees in the straw beside her, heedless of the filth ruining his fine trousers. "Ash," she whispered, pulling back, slightly confused by the raw desperation in his eyes. "I am so sorry," he said, reaching out but stopping inches from her face, as if afraid he might shatter her. "I was blind. I was a fool. I let a snake whisper in my ear while I ignored the truth standing right in front of me." Lindsay looked at him, her heart pounding. "You found the proof. I found everything." Sebastian vowed, his blue eyes burning with intensity. "Crouch is in chains. He will never hurt you again. He will never hurt anyone again." The relief hit Lindsay like a physical blow. Her shoulders sagged and a sob escaped her throat. "My father. Is he?" "He is safe," Sebastian promised, quickly taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "I sent my personal carriage for him. Dr. Sterling, the best physician in the county, is with him now. He is being moved to the east wing of the manor. I swear to you, Lindsay, he will live like a king for the rest of his days." Lindsay looked down at their joined hands. The anger she had nursed for the last 24 hours tried to rise up, but it was drowned out by the sheer vulnerability of the man before her. This wasn't the imperious Lord Greystone who had ordered her arrest. This was the man she had pulled from the mud. "You left me here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You let him take me." "I know," Sebastian said, bowing his head, his forehead resting against their clasped hands. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for that single night of cowardice. Please, Lindsay, let me take you out of this darkness." The transition was jarring. One moment Lindsay was shivering in a dungeon. The next she was being ushered into a bathing chamber that was larger than her entire cottage. Mrs. Higgins, the motherly housekeeper, fussed over her with tears in her eyes, scrubbing away the prison grime and dressing her in a gown of soft, pale blue silk that had belonged to Sebastian's late mother. But Lindsay couldn't rest. Not yet. "Take me to him," she commanded the moment she was dressed. She found her father in a guest room filled with sunlight. Thomas Vance was propped up on goose-feather pillows, looking frail but clean. A fire roared in the hearth, and a bowl of rich broth sat on the bedside table. "Lindsay," Thomas rasped, his eyes widening. "Is that you? You look like an angel." Lindsay rushed to his side, burying her face in his neck. "I'm here, Papa. We're safe." Standing by the window watching them was Sebastian. He had washed and changed into fresh clothes, but the lines of exhaustion were still etched deep around his eyes. He looked like an intruder in his own home, unsure of his place in this scene of family reunion. When Thomas fell asleep, aided by the medicine Dr. Sterling had administered, Lindsay finally turned to the Duke. "Walk with me," she said. They walked out onto the stone terrace, overlooking the sprawling gardens of Greystone Manor. The storm had truly passed. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. "You look different," Sebastian said softly, leaning against the stone balustrade. "That color suits you. It matches the sky." "Don't," Lindsay said, raising a hand. "Don't try to charm me, Your Grace. We are not at a ball." Sebastian flinched slightly at the formal title. "I deserve that. But I meant it. You look regal." Lindsay looked out over the estate. From here she could see the patchwork of fields, the distant line of the river, and the small plume of smoke that might have been her own chimney. "You own all of this," Lindsay said quietly. "The land, the houses, the lives of the people who work them. Do you understand the weight of that now?" "I do," Sebastian replied. He turned to face the view, his expression solemn. "For 3 years I thought owning an estate meant balancing ledgers and signing leases. I thought if the numbers were black, the people were happy. I didn't see the fear. I didn't see the hunger. I didn't see men like Crouch turning my name into a curse." He turned back to her. "You opened my eyes, Lindsay. When you pulled me from that ditch, you didn't just save my life. You woke me up." He reached into his waistcoat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He held it out to her. Lindsay unfolded the cloth. Inside lay her mother's silver locket. It had been polished to a shine, the grime of the pawnbroker's shop wiped away. "I went back to Abernathy's," Sebastian explained. "I bought it back. It belongs to you. It should never have left your neck." Lindsay's fingers closed around the cool metal. Tears pricked her eyes again. "I was going to sell it to save us, to pay a debt we didn't owe." "There are no debts between us anymore," Sebastian said firmly. "In fact, I am the one in debt. I owe you everything." He took a step closer. The air between them crackled with a tension that had been building since the moment their eyes met in the rain. "I don't want you to go back to the cottage, Lindsay." he said, his voice low and rough. And where would I go? She challenged him, looking up into his face. I am a farmer's daughter. You are a duke. Do you expect me to stay here as a guest forever? People will talk. They will say I am your mistress. Let them talk, Sebastian said fiercely. Let them say what they want. I don't care about the whispers of society anymore. I care about the truth. And the truth is, I cannot imagine walking into this house and not finding you in it. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. I need you, Lindsay. Not just to manage the house or look after your father. I need your fire. I need your honesty. I need someone who isn't afraid to yell at me when I'm sinking in the mud. You are a difficult man to rescue, Sebastian Thorne. She whispered, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Then rescue me again, he murmured. Stay. Marry me. Lindsay stopped breathing. Marry you? You are mad. The scandal alone. The scandal be damned. Sebastian laughed, a sound of pure liberation. I am the Duke of Greystone. I make the rules. And my rule is this: I will only marry a woman brave enough to save a stranger and strong enough to forgive a fool. He dropped to one knee right there on the terrace, ignoring the servants who were peeking through the glass doors. Lindsay Vance, he said, looking up at her with adoring eyes. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming the Duchess of Greystone? Will you help me heal this land? And perhaps heal me in the process? Lindsay looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the arrogance that had been stripped away, replaced by humility and love. She saw a man who was willing to change. She smiled, the first true, radiant smile she had shown him since the storm. Get up, you foolish man, she said, pulling him to his feet. You'll ruin your breeches. Is that a yes? Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Sebastian didn't wait. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't the tentative kiss of a suitor. It was the claiming kiss of a man who had found his other half. It tasted of sunlight and second chances. 6 months later, the county of Derbyshire was unrecognizable. The repairs to the tenant cottages were complete. The grain stores were full, and the threat of eviction was a distant memory. Silas Crouch was rotting in a prison hulk in the Thames, a cautionary tale for any who dared to exploit the poor. But the biggest change was at the manor itself. The heavy gates, once always closed, were now open. In the great garden, a summer fete was in full swing. Music drifted over the lawn where farmers danced alongside gentry. Thomas Vance sat in a cushioned chair, laughing as he watched the children play a warm blanket over his knees, not because he was sick, but because the evening breeze was cool. And in the center of it all stood Lindsay. She wore a dress of emerald green, but her hands were not idle. She was pouring cider for a tenant, laughing at a joke, her eyes bright. Sebastian watched her from the terrace steps. He leaned on his cane. He still carried it, a reminder of the injury that had changed his life, and felt a profound sense of peace. He walked down to her, slipping his arm around her waist. She leaned into him naturally, her head resting on his shoulder. They look happy, Sebastian murmured. They are happy, Lindsay corrected him, because they know they are safe, because they know their duke actually cares. Their duchess, Sebastian corrected her, kissing her temple. They listen to me, Lindsay, but they love you. Lindsay turned to him, fingering the silver locket that rested against her throat. We did this together, Ash, you and me. From the mud to the stars, he whispered. As the sun set over the rolling hills of Derbyshire, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, the Duke and his Duchess stood together, not above their people but among them. proof that the greatest love stories don't begin in ballrooms, but in the storms that force us to save each other. And that is the story of how Lindsay Vance went from saving a stranger in the mud to ruling the land he owned. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest struggles lead to the most beautiful destinations, and that true love is about partnership forgiveness and seeing the worth in every human being. I hope you enjoyed this journey of drama, justice, and romance. If Lindsay's bravery inspired you, please hit that like button and share this video with a friend who loves a good historical romance. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment? Was it the rescue, the confrontation, or the proposal? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.